If the universe is always working in your favor, why are you experiencing such a cosmic delay right now in your life? Today's August the 8th, and we're going to dive into tomorrow's exact formation of a mixed elemental kite that's forming with Saturn at the head, Mars at the tail, and being supported by Uranus and Pluto on the side. And to make things even more complicated, Neptune is conjunct with Saturn in its retrogradation motion. And so arguably the Neptune-Saturn conjunction is the head of the kite, but by technicality it's Saturn. Before we get into it, I'm Michael the Hierophant. I'm a practicing mystic and magi, and I invite you to join me every single Wednesday for consciousness conjunctions and conversations. It's my weekly astrological and divination-based workshop that I hold on Zoom. We get together at 6:30 Pacific, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern every single Wednesday. It's completely and absolutely free. We get together and we talk about last week's energy transits, how those energies manifested in our lives, both anecdotally and as a community. And then we weave together elemental threads to see how these energies are playing out in each other's lives. We then go over the next week's transits and I teach you what to look for and how to place your own narratives within the greater cosmic narrative. And what this allows you to take away from the class, and what I think is one of the greatest takeaways that I impart my students, is understanding and further delineating your own spiritual journey, where your story fits in, as I said, the cosmic narrative. We are constantly pulling strings that lead us down different paths in life, and while there might be a fixed destination at the end of the road that either we or the universe has pre-selected for us before incarnation, there are always a multitude of ways to get there. And when we're navigating in this very dark forest that we've never been in before called life, I like to tell my students that the best way forward is to use a compass, and the best compass we have available to us is the stars above. So please join me. You can check out the link in my bio. It's an evergreen link, so even if the date doesn't reflect appropriately, it will always be that Wednesday at 6:30 Pacific. Let's get back into this kite formation because there is literally so much to talk about. So much to talk about, I don't even know if we'll be able to fit it all in one video, but we're gonna try. So a kite is known as a geometric pattern, and a geometric pattern in astrology signifies that there is intense karmic burden or intense karmic ramification around the formation happening. So there are some dates that I want us to look back at, and others might argue with me that these don't have anything to do with this. However, with the full moon in Aquarius happening simultaneously with this kite motion, I can't help but look at it as a mystic and see a culmination of timelines and decisions that we've made that are now bringing us to where we are now, and we are now at a critical juncture of this journey. So I want to go back and I want to invite you to look at the new moon in Aquarius that happened January 29th, 2025. What intentions did you set? What was going on in your life at the time? Since that new moon in Aquarius, probably a lot of life has happened and you've made a lot of micro decisions, and I can almost guarantee you that what is culminating over this weekend, that spiritual checkpoint that we are going to reach with this full moon in Aquarius, which will happen at roughly 1 a.m. Pacific time, Saturday morning, or very late Friday night if you're practicing magic and moon magic. Basically, we're likely seeing a culmination of energies that began and the seeds were sown under that new moon in Aquarius. Now, we're coming to basically a convergence of timelines, and even the astrology would suggest that through that kite pattern. So let's break down what's happening in this kite pattern. At the top of the kite, that is known as the kite leader, and it is usually the planet that is essentially leading the charge. It's creating the obstacle that the kite is asking for us to move through. Now, kites are known as benefic. They tend to be auspicious. However, kites provide a challenge. So I like to compare a kite to being a very difficult scenario that you will benefit from if you move through it. Now, does that change the challenge? No, absolutely not. But fortunately in a kite, we get support from the wings, the elements on the sides, which in this case is Pluto retrograde and Uranus in direct motion in Gemini. So we have Saturn and Neptune conjunct at the head of the kite. and they are both retrograde in Aries, which is giving us that physical and mental reality check. And if you want to dive more into what the Venus-Neptune retrograde conjunction signifies, go and check out the video that I did on it a couple days ago for a further breakdown. And what that's doing is that's giving us a reality check in the Arian section of our chart. That's opposing Mars in Libra. And when Mars is in Libra, Mars is focused on peacekeeping and negotiating. We're also going to have a predisposition, no matter where it lands, in driving forward connection. And I mean that in terms of other people, relationships. Libra is very associated with balance, and in doing so becomes a little fixated with the relationships in our lives. So where Mars might want to drive forward, we find with Mars in Libra that we can only drive forward if we're maintaining and making the relationships in our lives more agreeable and more negotiable, is a better way to say it. So this opposition between Mars and Libra and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries in retrograde suggests a compromise that needs to be made. We have something that's coming up in the physical and spiritual reality check of our lives between the Neptune-Saturn conjunction in Aries. And we have Mars in Libra, which is saying that we need to negotiate. We need to focus more on our relationships in our lives, our connections in our lives, because we can't really get forward. What makes this really interesting, though, is that Saturn in Aries is in its fall. However, it's exalted in Libra. Mars is in its fall in Libra and is in domicile in Aries. So we have this very light and non-traditional form of a mutual reception happening, where it almost seems that if the planetary alignment were switched, we might actually be able to move through this a little bit easier and with a little bit more forward momentum. However, with both of these planets being in their fall, but there being this like slight mutual reception happening between them, what's actually suggestive is that this is a delay that benefits us. This is some sort of holdback moment where Mars doesn't really have the drive that it needs to move forward like a spear, like it normally would in other areas of the chart. And instead, we're basically getting this Saturnian delay and restriction, this reality check, because the universe is cosmically aligning us to balancing our relationships in order to act on what that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries retrograde is showing us already. So to the sides, on the wings, we are being supported by Uranus and Gemini, which is forwarding our intellectual drive for innovation. And I know I just used a lot of Uranus and Gemini buzzwords, but it's the best way to understand it. No matter where Uranus is at in your chart, we're being seeded with ways to move forward. And think about this as positive change. I think about Uranus and Gemini being like, I had this goal in my life, and then when I got to the goal or started dealing with the details of the goal, I realized that maybe I hadn't actually considered the way that this could actually manifest in my life. That's very Uranus and Gemini. It's like a shocking intellectual realization. Pluto in retrograde in Aquarius on the other wing is going back over and ripping up energies we've already experienced to further reaffirm what we need to change in our karmic imprint in the Aquarian area of our charts in order to benefit the collective more. This is like our self-sacrifice to the collective. How do we help the people around us? Pluto wants us to get out of these collective beliefs that have been programmed in the Aquarian section of our chart so we can fully become these people that we need to be. So we have Pluto changing our belief system and programs in the Aquarian section of our chart. We have Uranus zapping us intellectually and saying, hey, what if actually? And all of this is further emphasized by the fact that there's this grand air trine that's, amongst this kite between Uranus and Gemini, Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, and Mars in Libra. And grand air trines are stereotypically known as being able to sit in duality. We're basically sitting in not knowing what's ahead. And so that's where I really get that the spiritual takeaway of this kite moment is that we're being delayed and restricted because we need to pay attention to some other area of our life that if we attend to now under this full moon in Aquarius, and likely having to do with the intentions that we set under the new moon in Aquarius, we have the convergence of timelines, we need to deal with this thing in order to see a completed manifestation of whatever we set out for under the new moon in Aquarius. Now, all of this is happening while Mercury is still retrograde. And the Mercury retrograde is directly opposing the full moon and Pluto retrograde in Aquarius by whole sign house, which suggests that we have been revisiting where we lack authenticity in the Leonic area of our chart. And if we can use that data and integrate our authenticity and come into the world in a more full expression, with more confidence, with more belief that this is what the inner child in me would have wanted, we can see a culminating completion of those new moon and Aquarius manifestations and beliefs or energies that we were working through at the end of January. And now we're going to see that culminate. Now, seems slightly unrelated, but a couple days after this, on the 12th, Jupiter and Venus will go conjunct in Cancer, and Venus rules Libra. So wherever Mars is having a hard time moving forward, it's all because of a Venetian outcome. We're going to see some sort of expansion in the Venetian area of our lives if we can act on the energy of this kite, which again is culminating under this full moon in Aquarius. Now, I know that there's a ton of information in this video, probably actually a lot more than I usually do, because geometric patterns are a lot to break down. You have to look at all the singular elements, and then you have to look at the greater picture of where this fits in the astrological year, what lunation, what sun, what sun cycle it's under. And we didn't even get into the sun cycle in this. Obviously, we're in Leo right now, so we're very much exploring the authenticity and our inner child. So if we can use that inner child data that's been coming to surface over this Mercury retrograde, we'll be able to move through this kite formation with a little bit more grace if we're willing to admit that, hey, maybe we're bound down and restricted for a good reason, and maybe there's something that's going to come out of this, again, Mars and Libra, where we have to put more stock in our relationships and connections to deal with the ramifications of that reality check that we've been getting with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and retrograde in Aries. So if you like these spiritual narratives and stories, I encourage you to check out the link in my bio. It's the RSVPify for my class every single Wednesday. I'm not going to re-explain it. I already did it earlier in this video. Tomorrow, I'm going to go over the full moon in Aquarius and probably talk more about how all of this is tail ending, where this story is going, and where the Mercury sextiling Mars is going to play in next week and how it all ties in. And I will either see you in the next video, but I hope to see you in class.